Hello and welcome to a live Deprogrammed with Keri Smith. I'm your host, Keri. I know this isn't our usual time and we're running into F&T time, so perhaps you'll be watching this later if you're hanging out at Friday Night Tights tonight. But I wanted to do a show today, and given the holidays and spending time with family, had a round trip, very quick round trip to spend Thanksgiving with my mother-in-law, and just got back to town and thought I would do one late because I wanted to talk about Trump's pick for NIH director. So welcome. If you are a regular, I see some familiar faces in the chat and some people who haven't been here in a while. Hello. Good to see you, Benjamin. Um, hello, Therese. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I hope that you ate lots of delicious food and that you really took time to celebrate and maybe even go offline a bit. I've been offline more this week than usual and I really enjoyed it. So I hope that you get the chance to do that too. Um, like I said, I did want to come back today though and talk about this pick. Now, if you're not aware, Trump just named, I would say, perhaps one of the most exciting nominations to his cabinet. And this is great news on the heels of the last episode that I did on Monday, where we talked about one of his disappointing picks, one of his COVIDian picks, and this is 180 degrees in the opposite direction, and I'm here for it. So Trump just announced Dr. Jay Bhattacharya as his nominee for the director of the National Institutes of Health. And I figured, since there are a lot of people who are not familiar with Jay Bhattacharya, especially people on the left who are not familiar with him, or maybe you've only heard the smears and the bad things in the press, I figured we could just do kind of a like, who is this doctor? Who is he? Who is this nominee? And we could go over some facts about him. So on the screen here, I have the announcement. And I love this guy, by the way. He's on Twitter. Before Elon owned Twitter, during Twitter 1.0, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya was one of the many doctors and scientists who were censored by Twitter. They had internal communications. We'll get to that later, but they had shadow banned him. And since he's been back, he's just been a joy to follow. So you can find him on X. And here's what he said about the announcement. He said, "I am honored and humbled by President Trump's nomination of me to be the next National Institutes of Health director. We will reform American scientific institutions so that they are worthy of trust again, and will deploy the fruits of excellent science to make America healthy again." And I love it. It's short and sweet. He's talking about, making science great again, which is good, making America healthy again, which is good. And I would be remiss if I didn't read some of the nomination, the statement. So this was from Trump. He says, "I am thrilled to nominate Jay Bhattacharya, MD, PhD, to serve as director of the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Bhattacharya will work in cooperation with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to direct the nation's medical research and to make important discoveries that will improve health and save lives." Jay is a professor of health policy at Stanford University, a research associate at the National Bureau of Economics Research, and a senior fellow by courtesy at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, Stanford Freeman Spogli Institute, and the Hoover Institution. He directs Stanford Center for Demography and Economics of Health and Aging. His research focuses on the health and well-being of vulnerable populations. That's important for one of our next points. Emphasizing the role of government programs, biomedical innovation, and economics. Jay is a co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration, an alternative to lockdowns proposed in October of 2020. His peer-reviewed research has been published in economics, statistics, legal, medical, public health, and health policy journals. He holds an MD and a PhD in economics from Stanford University. Together, Jay and RFK Jr. will restore the National Institutes for Health to a gold standard of medical research as they examine the underlying causes of and solutions to America's biggest health challenges, including our crisis of chronic illness and disease. Together, they will work hard to make America healthy again. So that's the announcement. Very exciting. I think this is probably This is right up there with our RFK for me in terms of level of excitement, maybe even more excited about this one because I think he is a badass. I think he's brilliant. I think he's an actual scientist. I think he cares about the truth. And I think he's a sincere guy. I get a really good gut check character read on this guy, which, he checks all the boxes. I'm extremely happy about this pick. Um, Feisty Octopus, hello. Hey, good to see you here. All the way from the Netherlands, Feisty Octopus says, hi, Keri. JB is one of my COVID heroes. His appointment is enormously encouraging. It is. It's so exciting because he's an actual he's intelligent and he doesn't seem to be evil also. Like he seems to be a good guy who's intelligent. And I like that. Good to see you here. Also, I wanted to say, thanks, Benjamin Joyner, for $5 super chat. Says, reprogrammed with Keri, deprogrammed with Keri, and then the little greater than F&T sign. Thank you, bud. Good to see you. Okay, well, let's go over a few facts about him. So, as you saw in Trump's announcement, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya is a doctor, a scientist, and an economist. He's a professor of medicine, economics, and health policy research at Stanford. As the announcement mentioned, he's the director of Stanford Center for Demography and Economics of Health and Aging. And so he focuses on the economics of healthcare and on vulnerable populations. And all of this, I think, makes him a perfect choice for the post-COVID debacle, because, as mentioned in the announcement, he has a particular set of skills, and his particular set of skills means that he looks at things not only from the perspective of a medical doctor, and a scientist, but from the perspective of an economist who looks at policy as well. He's not just looking at the medicine and the science, which he's looking at. He's also looking at policy and how all these things work together, and trying to figure out how his knowledge or our knowledge of science and medicine can help us make the best policy decisions. And that's kind of what we needed during the COVID years. So, as mentioned, he was one of the co-authors, along with two other esteemed scientists, one from Harvard, and I'm blanking on the other one, but we're about to pull it up. Two other scientists, they put out this letter. It was called the Great Barrington Declaration, and this was put out in 2020. And I knew, it's so funny, until he was nominated, I knew he was very vocal about his opposition to the COVID policy that led to lockdowns, and that led to things like masking children and putting COVID patients into nursing homes with elderly people. I know he was against a lot of the worst decisions that were made, and I know he was also censored. He was also shadow banned by Twitter. But I did not even know about this letter. Isn't that amazing? With how much news there is and how many things were going on during COVID, it wasn't until yesterday or the day before my husband was telling me, well, it's the Great Barrington Declaration. I'm like, excuse me, what are you talking about? So I may have read this at the time, but if I did, I didn't remember it. So we're going to take a look at it in case you didn't read it, or like me, or if you read it and can't really remember what he was saying. Now, remember, he put this out in 2020, in the first year of COVID policy. He was ballsy enough to put this out and say, hey, we don't all agree. There's not a scientific consensus yet on this novel coronavirus. I'm just going to scroll down and look at his. So it was Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. It was Dr. Sunetra Gupta, who's a professor at Oxford University, and Dr. Martin Kulldorff, who's a professor at Harvard Medicine. So it was the three of them. And they put this out in 2020, and it said they've had a ton of people sign it since then. Of course, more now, right? It says the Great Barrington Declaration. As infectious disease oh my gosh, I'm going to mess up this word. Epidemiologists. There we go. Epidemiologists and public health scientists, we have grave concerns about the damaging physical and mental health impacts of the prevailing COVID-19 policies and recommend an approach that we call focused protection. Coming from both the left and right and around the world, we have devoted our careers to protecting people. So, right off the bat, they're saying this isn't about politics. Some of us are on the right, some are on the left. We're from all around the world. We're just concerned with policy and looking at science and medicine to make the best policy decisions. Current lockdown policies are producing devastating effects on short and long-term public health. The results, to name a few, include lower childhood vaccination rates, worsening cardiovascular disease outcomes. That has proved to be true, right? Looking to where we are now in 2024. Fewer cancer screenings and deteriorating mental health, leading to greater excess mortality in years to come, with the working class and younger members of society carrying the heaviest burden. This has also proved to be true because if you go back and think about it, the younger people in society, those who were kept out of school, who were masked, we have now seen that their development has been slowed to such a degree that the CDC actually went and edited their milestones for childhood development. They put out new milestones and said, hey, children are not learning to speak as quickly as they used to. They're not learning to use complete sentences as quickly as they used to. And we looked at some of those on Monday. They just quietly put this out. They didn't take any blame for it. They didn't even mention how COVID policy might have affected this, when toddlers are learning how to speak, not being able to lip read and to look at the way that words are formed on the mouths of adults, which we prevented them from doing. We've also seen among young people escalating depression rates, anxiety rates. So this was not, they had the foresight to say this in 2020, as did a lot of people. A lot of us were saying this, and it didn't protect them that they were esteemed scientists and doctors. They were shadow banned. They were called all kinds of horrible names for saying this back then. So I'll continue. They said, keeping students out of school is a grave injustice. And you know what's funny? I'm about to show you some clips because flash forward now to 2024. All of the talking heads, the media, the scientists who were calling these guys crazy at the time, they're now doing interviews where they're saying, hey, in hindsight, maybe we shouldn't have kept kids out of school. Hey, in hindsight, how could we have known? We didn't know. That they're trying to rewrite history as if they didn't censor and silence the people who were voicing these concerns back then. So they said keeping students out of school is a grave injustice. Keeping these measures in place until a vaccine is available will cause irreparable damage, with the underprivileged disproportionately harmed. Fortunately, our understanding of the virus is growing. We know that vulnerability to death from COVID-19 is more than 1,000-fold higher in the old and infirm than in the young. Indeed, for children, COVID-19 is less dangerous than many other harms, including the flu. That's right. If you're on the left and this is shocking to you, we knew this back in 2020. If you had not been in the corporate media bubble that you were in, where you were being fed propaganda, you would have known this back then too. And those of us who were saying stuff like this were being banned, and we were having posts taken down, and we were getting strikes and told that our accounts would be deleted. The doctors and scientists who were saying this were being banned. They were being censored. And you were in your corporate media, your corporate/government echo chamber, and just listening to the propaganda. And now they're telling you, because you were in their bubble, now they're telling you, oh, if we had only known. Hindsight's 2020. Too bad there was nobody saying this back then. Oh, there was. There were lots of people saying this. They just didn't want you to hear them. Okay, they continue. As immunity builds in the population, the risk of infection to all, including the vulnerable, falls. We know that all populations will eventually reach herd immunity, i.e., the point at which the rate of new infections is stable, and that this can be assisted by, but is not dependent upon, a vaccine. Our goal should therefore be to minimize mortality and social harm until we reach herd immunity. You know what's funny? This is actually, if you want to talk about scientific consensus, herd immunity was always scientific consensus until this policy that they wanted to push was different, until they wanted to justify lockdowns and closing schools and masking kids. And then they went about the business of pushing propaganda to make herd immunity sound like something crazy. Like, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. It would be as if they had decided to make you believe gravity was a conspiracy theory. The most compassionate approach that balances the risks and benefits of reaching herd immunity is to allow those who are at minimal risk of death to live their lives normally, to build up immunity to the virus through natural infection, while better protecting those who are at the highest risk. We call this focused protection. Imagine that. Imagine that. Adopting measures to protect the vulnerable should be the central aim of public health response to COVID-19. By way of example, nursing homes should use staff with acquired immunity and perform frequent testing of other staff and all visitors. You know what they did instead? Well, in New York and some other states, they put COVID patients, people who were sick with COVID, into nursing homes. I don't know if you're on the left and you didn't hear about that. Go and look it up. We all knew it was happening. Maybe you didn't hear about it because it was Democrats doing it. Staff rotation should be minimized. Retired people living at home should have groceries and other essentials delivered to their home. When possible, they should meet family members outside rather than inside. A comprehensive and detailed list of measures, including approaches to multi-generational households, can be implemented and is well within the scope and capability of public health professionals. Those who are not vulnerable should be immediately allowed to resume life as normal. Instead of what they did, right, which is to throw people in prison. Lisa Hansen is a grandmother I got to interview who they put in jail for opening her coffee shop, for trying to run her small business so she didn't lose her business, for being an adult and making her own decisions and trusting that other adults would make the best decisions also. Choice, right? My body, my choice. Where did that go, Democrats? Those who are not vulnerable should immediately be allowed to resume life as normal. Simple hygiene measures such as hand washing and staying home when sick should be practiced by everyone to reduce the herd immunity threshold. Schools and universities should be open for in-person teaching. Extracurricular activities such as sports should be resumed. Young, low-risk adults should work normally rather than from home. Restaurants and other businesses should be open. Arts, music, sports, and other cultural activities should resume. People who are more at risk may participate if they wish, while society as a whole enjoys the protection conferred upon the vulnerable by those who have built up herd immunity. So they put this out October 4th, 2020. It's just amazing. And so here are all the epidemiologists, the scientists, professors of pediatrics, of microbiology and immunology, all these different esteemed doctors and scientists who signed on to this. Did you know about all these doctors, leftists, who agreed with this in 2020? Did you know? A lot of these doctors and scientists were censored and banned and smeared so that Anthony Fauci could stand on television and tell you that he is science. So that con artist could stand on television and try and force you into taking what is most accurately described as an experimental shot. Experimental because at the time they put it out, and even now, it had not been around long enough for longitudinal testing. We'll see if YouTube takes this video down. I've had 2 videos struck in the past month. The most recent one, I just had to do they said they rejected my dispute and now I had to escalate it to an appeal. And if I lose the appeal, then I'll have a copyright strike on my channel. And then I believe what happens then is you can't stream for 30 days. I think that's what happened last time. So we'll see what happens. But there are still some things about COVID we're not allowed to say. Things that are absolutely true. Karen, Alexa, I recognize your face. Thanks for becoming a member. Good to see you. Yeah, Davina, people lost their jobs, their businesses, their homes. Lawsuits incoming. I hope so. I hope so. Okay, so as you saw, he opposed lockdowns, he opposed mandates, and here's some of the fallout of that. First of all, I wonder, should I get to the Twitter blacklisting first? Yeah, let's do this. No. Let's start with Fauci. So after he authored this, Fauci and the then president at the National Institutes of Health, Francis Collins, launched an all-out attack on Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and tried to smear him as some kind of crazy person and, basically tell people not to listen to him. And so I've got a video here. Let's see. I just want to make sure I get the right one. Sorry, bear with me, guys. Here, this is the one. This is a good summary.
Go Health Alliance came under fire this week, losing federal funding after Health and Human Services disbarred it for letting oversight of the Wuhan Institute of Virology fall through the cracks. In a hearing earlier this week, House Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic Chairman Brad Wenstrup grilled Peter Darzak, the president of the nonprofit at the center of the origins of COVID. Let's watch.
Unfortunately, there does not appear to have been adequate oversight of EcoHealth and its...
Let me back up and let me summarize this for you. If you're not familiar with this, I've talked about it before on this channel. There's a Vanity Fair article that you should definitely go read. But basically, when the coronavirus hit, there were people who started wondering, hey, it originated in Wuhan. There is a lab there where they study gain of function research on coronavirus, where they create their whole intent is to manufacture a virus that is more deadly and more infectious. Perhaps, and that's what this virus is, perhaps this virus escaped from the lab there that makes viruses like this, that studies viruses like this. And now, that question of, did it come from that lab? It's a question. It's not a statement of fact. It's just a question. It's not even a statement of, some people were saying, oh, well, are you trying to say that they put it out on purpose? Or nobody was saying any of that. They were like, let's find out. Maybe it was an accidental leak. Who knows? But it seems likely that it came from that lab. And so what happened at the time? The Lancet letter. The Lancet letter was a letter that was spearheaded by this guy they just mentioned, Peter Darzak. Peter Darzak was the head of a company called EcoHealth Alliance. Now, why is that important? Because when Obama banned gain of function research here in the United States, that was Obama who banned it. The National Institutes for Health, which is what Trump just nominated Dr. Bhattacharya for, to head that up. The National Institutes for Health took our tax dollars and sent it to this company headed up by Peter Darzak called EcoHealth Alliance. It was in New York. And EcoHealth Alliance took our tax dollars and sent it to the Wuhan lab. So our tax dollars in this roundabout way were still funding the gain of function research on coronaviruses that Obama had banned here. And so what did Peter Darzak do? He put out a letter in this journal called The Lancet. It's a scientific journal. And he got all these other scientists to sign it. And he wrote this letter that was basically like, There's no way that the virus came from the lab. That's a crazy conspiracy theory. And nobody should even ask if it came from the lab, because there's no way ever, ever, ever that it came from the lab. And by the way, none of us scientists who are signing this letter have any conflict of interest. He said that. And he wasn't the only one with the conflict of interest. And they put this letter out. And then what did the corporate media do? And the government? What did Fauci do and the NIH? They all pointed to the letter. They all used the letter as the propaganda it was intended to be. To label anyone, any doctor like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, to label them a conspiracy theorist if they asked, hey, maybe we should get to the bottom of like where this coronavirus came from. They were labeled and smeared a bad person. So now, I don't know if you're aware, if you're on the left, maybe you're not. But now a lot of your corporate media is now telling you, yeah, in hindsight, they're doing that thing again. In hindsight, it might have come from the lab that makes these kind of viruses. Like, they're like, oh, if only we could have known. Let me continue.
Experiments. This issue has highlighted broader concerns with the NIH, especially that it is up to the grantee to oversee themselves. This is a recipe for waste, fraud, abuse, and deception.
Who was at the helm during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, previously denied that the novel coronavirus came from a lab, but in newly released transcripts of a closed-door congressional interview with the select subcommittee, he appears to have changed his tune. The majority counsel asked Collins, quote, "We've talked about this an awful lot. I think I know the answer to the question, but I want to ask it. Is the origin of COVID-19 still unsettled science?" Unquote. To which Collins said, yes. Here to dive for.
Wow, isn't that amazing? So the former head of the NIH, Francis Collins, who pushed all of the COVID policy and who smeared Dr. Jay Bhattacharya as some kind of crazy conspiracy theorist for even asking, that guy is now saying, oh, wait a minute, it was settled science that we knew it came from a wet market. It jumped several species in some crazy story. It was, but now it's back to being unsettled science. That's as far as they're willing to go, is to say, well, we don't know anymore. Maybe it did come from the lab. That's what, as far as they're willing to say out loud to the press. You know what else Francis Collins, the former director of the NIH, has done? He's also backtracked on closing schools. All the things he criticized Dr. Jay Bhattacharya for and called him crazy for, he's now saying, in hindsight, I've got a clip of that. We can look at that, where he's like, in hindsight, maybe we shouldn't have closed the schools. Maybe we're too narrowly focused. These guys. But so these ladies on the Hill, they brought on Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. I believe this interview was from about 6 months ago. I just want to play a little bit of it.
Further into this bombshell news is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, professor of medicine, economics, and health research policy at Stanford University, who's faced censorship in the past over his views on COVID. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Bhattacharya.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to get into this. You faced some backlash. Can you talk about what that backlash was over? Was it over the origins of COVID-19, being in a lab? And what do you think the public health ramifications are with this, honestly, I would say communications disaster, really trying to tamp down any idea of COVID origins, being in a lab? Now, how is science going to come back from this in a meaningful way? There's some good research still going on. But first, I really want to hear about this backlash and how you feel now, especially seeing this news.
Yeah, so the backlash I faced was over my position on lockdowns. I argued that we should have focused protection of vulnerable older people and opening schools and letting younger people live their lives. In October 2020, Francis Collins wrote an email calling me and my colleagues, Martin Kulldorff of Harvard and Sunetra Gupta of Oxford, fringe epidemiologists, and then he called for a devastating takedown. Which led to, just media hit pieces, vile attacks on me and my family. It was really quite stressful.
So that was Francis Collins. He wrote this email saying, and he He actually said devastating takedown. Those were his words. And he called Dr. Jay Bhattacharya a fringe person, like crazy conspiracy theory person, right? For daring to say that maybe perhaps we should not be closing schools. I just want you to look at this guy now. So this is from a year ago, December of 2023. And when this came out, I may have covered it on the show back then. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe he was just turning around completely and now saying, oh, if we had only known. And now what's he saying now? Or a year ago in 2023, he's saying all the things that he called Dr. Jay Bhattacharya fringe for, and saying, oh, I wish we had hindsight. This is an article from Mediaite. Former National Institutes of Health Director Francis Collins admits to narrow, really unfortunate pandemic mindset. Quote, we weren't thinking about collateral damage, end quote. Yeah, you weren't. And you know what? You were smearing and silencing the doctors who were. Like Dr. Bhattacharya. You were smearing them. You were calling for devastating takedowns. This is him. Listen to him.
As a guy living inside the Beltway, feeling the sense of crisis, trying to decide what to do in some situation room in the White House with people who had data that was incomplete, we weren't really thinking about what that would mean to Wilk and his family in Minnesota, 1,000 miles away from where the virus was hitting so hard. We weren't really considering the consequences in communities that were not New York City or some other big city. The public health people, we talked about this earlier, and this is a really important point. If you're a public health person and you're trying to make a decision, you have this very narrow view of what the right decision is, and that is something that will save a life. Doesn't matter what else happens. So you attach infinite value to stopping the disease and saving a life. You attach a zero value to whether this actually totally disrupts people's lives, ruins the economy, and has many kids kept out of school in a way that they never quite require.
Collateral damage.
So collateral damage. This is a public health mindset. And I think a lot of us involved in trying to make those recommendations had that mindset, and that was really unfortunate. That's another mistake we made.
Okay. Wow, you made a mistake. Instead of listening to the people who had the broader perspective, people like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who has a background in both, science, medicine, and economics, so policy. Instead of listening to him, you launched an attack on him. So there were voices. There were lots of scientific voices that were saying, hey, slow your roll. And I love the way he tries to justify it by saying, we were just interested, we had a narrow focus and our interest is in saving lives. No, it wasn't. Even that justification doesn't hold water because you were putting sick COVID patients into nursing homes with old people, with vulnerable populations. And you were, as he just admitted, talking about how the collateral damage was we destroyed the economy and inflicted lasting damage on a whole generation of children. Well, how many lives is that? How do you calculate that? We're still calculating that. Yes, this is the scumbag. Eugene over at Rumble. Hey, Eugene says this is the scumbag who defamed eminent scientists as fringe. Yes. Do you want to see who else he is? While he was director of National Institutes for Health, and he was appearing on all these videos with Fauci, defending the COVID policy, defending these authoritarian measures, defending removing our liberty, our individual rights, our rights to our own medical decisions. This is what he was also doing. He was on all those, you can go on YouTube and you can just look up Francis Collins and see tons of interviews with him pushing the COVID propaganda at the time. But you can also see him doing this. I don't know if you guys remember this, but this was at the height of the pandemic. And this is the director of the National Institutes for Health. He thought it would be great to get out his guitar and sing to us somewhere past the pandemic. Did you guys see this? This is when I was like, this guy is a nut job. This is the guy calling Dr. Jay Bhattacharya French.
Somewhere past the pandemic, when we're free, there's a life I remember, full of activity.
This guy was head of the National Institutes for Health. This was Biden's guy. This was Fauci's guy. And they want to try and malign Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who you just heard from. I want you to compare these two gentlemen and which one has, I don't know, more gravitas, seems a little bit more there. This is, yeah, emo trash. WTF did I return the screen to? Hey, they want to call Trump's picks weird. This was the COVID director for the National Institutes for Health, who helped set COVID policy, the authoritarian lockdown policy, who helped to defame and smear and try and take down any scientists and doctors who disagree with him and Fauci.
Somewhere past the pandemic, no quarantine. We'll all stay well and healthy thanks to a safe vaccine.
Do you see what he did there? This is back when they were saying you all have to get it. You all have to get the shot. Then we'll end the quarantine. You know, the beatings will continue until a morale improves. The quarantine will continue until you all take the shot. It's crazy. This guy was the director of the National Institutes of Health. And they are like, oh, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya is crazy. It's just incredible. Let's play some of what the mainstream media is saying about Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. This is from PBS.
President-elect Donald Trump has selected one of the nation's most prominent critics of COVID-19 era lockdowns and mandates to lead the National Institutes of Health. Stanford University physician Jay Bhattacharya famously co-authored what's known as the Great Barrington Declaration, a 2020 manifesto that advocated allowing COVID to spread among most people in order to achieve herd immunity and focusing instead on protecting the elderly and other vulnerable groups. It was widely criticized by top public health officials at the time. For more on this.
Yeah. Did you notice how PBS doesn't give you all the background we just talked about? They don't tell you about anything about the NIH and EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak and the Lancet letter and how Francis Collins and Fauci said we're going to do a devastating takedown of Dr. Bhattacharya. No, he just says it like he was widely criticized by a lot of other doctors. Yes, he was on purpose.
This pick, we are joined again by Jennifer Nuzzo. She runs the Pandemic Center at Brown University's School of Public Health. Jennifer, so good to have you back on the program. So Bhattacharya is tasked with running the NIH, the nation's preeminent biomedical research organization. What do you make of this pick?
Well, it's a really controversial pick for a few reasons. The first one is that typically the people tapped to lead this organization, are people who have a long history of doing clinical research, or maybe they've spent a long time working in laboratories doing laboratory research. Dr. Bhattacharya is an economist, and he is trained as a medical doctor, but he is an economist and he works more on policy. So that's one way that.
Okay. So they take one of his gifts, which is that he's an economist, and they use it to throw shade on one of his other gifts, which is that he is a scientist, but they're trying to make it seem like he's not. And then she kind of throws in there, and a medical doctor. But that's also, they're using the fact that he's an economist, which is an asset. He's not just a scientist. He's not just a doctor. He's also an economist. So he has a better, what would you say, a broader view of how medicine and science maybe should affect policy. He's at least got a broader perspective. But they're trying to make it look like a bad thing. Oh, they're painting him as just an economist. You see that? He's an economist. That's terrible.
That's controversial. And then, of course, the second area of controversy is what you referenced, which is that during the COVID-19 pandemic, he was a really outspoken critic. He was, one who really questioned a lot of issues. And for that, I think people sort of worried whether his approach to this job will be driven by dogma versus evidence.
I mean, I went back and reread the Great Barrington Declaration.
Can you believe this? Let me take this down for a second. She just said, people are worried that he might follow dogma instead of evidence. This coming from the cabal, the media, and the government that pushed dogma during the COVID years in the Biden administration, pushed dogma in the National Institutes for Health with that freak that we just saw on his guitar, Dr. Francis Collins, pushed dogma with Fauci, who declared that he is science. And if you criticize him, you're criticizing science. They pushed dogma. They did not have a medical consensus. They did not have a scientific consensus. They lied to us repeatedly. Fauci lied to us about masks, admitted he lied, and then said he did it for a good reason. They pushed dogma. This is DARVO. This is deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender. This is what psychopaths and sociopaths do, cluster B individuals do, where they accuse the target of the very thing that they are doing. They push propaganda and dogma. So what do they have to say about somebody who actually, a doctor who actually cares about getting to the truth, who cares about transparency of methodology, who opposes like censoring scientists? They have to call him dogmatic.
And in hindsight, there is a part of it that does have some grains of truth. And
let me back up just a second. This is what I'm talking about. They all keep using the word hindsight, just like Francis Collins. So he says, I just read the Great Barrington Declaration, and now he says, in hindsight, there might have been some things in there that we should have listened to. In hindsight, this is their mea culpa. They can't take they don't want to be held responsible or accountable for pushing the propaganda and the lies on us. So they're pretending like it took the benefit of hindsight to come to some of these observations. No, it didn't. There were many of us with these observations back then. There were many scientists and doctors with these who were making these observations back then, and you guys silenced them. The benefit of hindsight.
And in hindsight, there is a part of it that does have some grains of truth, and that was the low risk that COVID posed to young people and the larger risk of keeping them out of school for so long. I mean, again, hindsight is always 20/20, but when you look at that,
we knew then, you asshole. I'm sorry for my language. That'll be the only swear. I'm sorry if you had little ears in the room. This just infuriates me. We knew then. That's why Dr. Bhattacharya, one of the things you should know about him, he testified in Florida against requiring masks in schools, against mask mandates in schools. And they also attacked him for that. But he was willing to put his name and his reputation on the line in pursuit of truth and what he thought, and I think many of us in the chat would agree, was in the best interest of those kids. There were lots of people like him who were sticking their neck out there at the time, and guys like this suited stooge were cutting them off. And then he has the nerve to sit there and say, maybe he was right about keeping kids out of school. He doesn't even have the grace to say it that full-throatedly. He's like, well, maybe hindsight's 20/20.
How do you look at his COVID advocacy at the time?
Yeah, I mean, there are some things that I agreed with him on. I think calling out school closures as being particularly harmful is something I very much agreed with him on. Obviously, it's also true that those who are of advanced age were always at greatest risk of experiencing severe illness if they became infected with COVID. So those points he was, quite right on. I think what was quite challenging about the Great Barrington Declaration was that it proposed that we sort of only sequester people who are high risk and just sort of let everybody else go out, potentially to get infected. And, even if you thought that was a reasonable idea, it was just impractical because there was no way you could truly sequester people who were high risk.
Bullshit. That's absolute bullshit. And yet you people thought you could sequester a whole country, but you couldn't figure out how to suggest sequestering if you were in part of the vulnerable population. You're saying you couldn't change your messaging to say, hey, maybe you should shelter at home if you're in a high risk category, and here are the high risk categories. You couldn't get specific and say that. No, you had to throw the whole country into a panic, so much so that parents were putting masks on their kids needlessly. You're sick. And now you sit there and say, oh, we couldn't have done it more focused and targeted on the actual vulnerable populations. We couldn't have given actual real information. We had to throw the whole country into a panic. How else could we destroy the economy? We needed to destroy the economy. Do you get it yet? If America is thriving, how are they going to foment a communist revolution? This is a real question. How are we going to give up our liberty if they don't destroy the economy and put everyone into a panic and whip everyone up to attack their unvaccinated neighbors, which is what they were doing? How do they get ultimate control over us? How do they get more government control and less individual rights if they don't scare the ever-living crap out of everyone and shut down everything? I think that's what she meant to say, don't you?
So, that's where the real controversy comes from. But, at the end of the day, it was quite hard to figure out what was the right thing to do. And, people of all sorts, and myself included, didn't get everything right.
Well, it was quite hard to figure out what was the right thing to do. So you fail at ethics, basically, because it's not hard. It's not hard to say that we don't abandon our Constitution just because the government sees an opportunity to do so. The powerful and the elite see an opportunity to do so. That's not hard to figure out what's right and wrong. To say, hey, it's wrong to fire people who work for the government if they don't choose to get this new and experimental shot. That's not hard. It's not hard to say, hey, it's wrong to be doing mask mandates on children when children are not at high risk. They're at a higher risk for the flu. It's not hard. What she's basically saying is like, ethics is hard for me, for some of us. Yeah, it is. It is for people with bad character, for cowards, narcissists. I'm not saying any more curse words. I already said one to show. I'm not saying any more, but this lady, this lady makes me so mad. I didn't get everything right. I didn't get the ethics part right.
Right. It's a novel virus. That's why they call it that. At the NIH.
It's a novel virus. That's why they call it that. Yeah, you know what else was novel? Your vaccine. Your policy.
When you're in charge of marshaling the federal government's enormous resources and deciding what to focus on and what not to focus on, what's the concern there with someone like him at the helm of that organization?
Well, so the concern for anyone tapped for this position, and it is a really important position. The NIH is a critically important agency for the US. It's the place where if you have a loved one with a rare disease or someone with a cancer, it's where you're going to look for cures. So it is critically important for the nation's health. It's also critically important as a driver of the US economy. And for every dollar that NIH spends, it contributes about 2.5 times that in terms of economic activity. So it is a really important economic driver, as well as the place where people are hoping for cures. You want anyone who's going to lead the agency to do so driven by evidence, not dogma. You want them to.
Did you hear that? Anybody who leads the agency needs to be driven by evidence, not dogma. Now, compare that to the previous head of the agency. We just watched Francis Collins saying, basically, in hindsight, we were led by dogma. I mean, he's like, in hindsight, we didn't think about the fact that we were destroying the economy and an entire generation of children. Why? Because they were led by dogma. I want to put him back up here playing his guitar because I just think it's a great juxtaposition, but I'm not going to. Maybe later we'll play more of his stupid song. I love that she's just going on and on about this is what you know, it needs to be someone respectable and not led by dogma. It needs to be someone this is an important job for you. It needs an important person. And then Francis Collins like, somewhere past the pandemic. These people are a joke. They're an absolute joke. I talked about the Twitter blacklisting. So when Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci launched their all-out attack on all of the scientists and doctors who were disagreeing with them and offering, you know, critiques or counterpoints or counter views, there were many of you on the left who were completely unaware, not just of the propaganda you were being fed constantly, but also of the censorship that was happening. I've mentioned this before, but I have some friends in real life, not online friends who I see in my everyday life, who believe it or not, if you're not in that bubble, it may sound crazy, but in that bubble, they didn't even know that there was censorship happening a lot of the times, or they thought it was just a right wing, another conspiracy theory. And so I've had friends I've talked to where I've shown them stuff from the Twitter files, or I've told them about, and even personal anecdotes. Like I had a scientific study removed from Facebook, and then they directed me to their new terms of service, which they kept updating during the COVID years. And the new terms of service at that time said, oh, well, now we're going to take down anything, even scientific studies, even things that are factual, if they might cause vaccine hesitancy. You know, they were acting as judge, jury, and censor. Like they were taking down everything. Scientists. And so there were doctors like Jay Bhattacharya who everyone noticed he's being shadow banned. Now, if you remember, Twitter denied this. They lied to us. They put out statements about how they don't shadow ban. And when they were finally forced to admit that they do shadow ban, they said, well, basically, yeah, we do all that stuff, but we call it visibility filtering. So they just give it a different name and the problem solver. Yeah, we do that. It's like Amber Heard during the Johnny Depp trial where she's like, I didn't punch you, I hit you. Oh, okay. That's a big difference. Oh, you just call it something else. But they were shadow banning. Here's an article. This one was from the Wall Street Journal, but it was archived as part of these congressional hearings, and so we're able to read the whole thing. The Twitter blacklisting of Jay Bhattacharya. The social media platform revealed that many had been censored and shadow banned. I was trying to get the date on this, but this was sometime in 2023, I believe. Yeah. Okay. Jay Bhattacharya, professor of medicine at Stanford University, was a latecomer to Twitter, joining in the summer of 2021. In his first tweet, he linked to a recent article he had written that discussed age-based mortality risk and natural immunity, among other topics. Oh, not natural immunity. Natural immunity, they turned that, just like herd immunity, they turned natural immunity into a boogeyman. YouTube was taking down videos about vitamin C, the benefits of vitamin C. They were taking down videos about the benefits of vitamin D. basic science, basic knowledge, basic medical knowledge. They were removing them. Why? Because it might cause vaccine hesitancy. So he linked to a recent article he had written that discussed age-based mortality risk and natural immunity, among other topics. His main message was powerful and contrary to COVID policies enacted across the country. Quote, mass testing is an insidious form of lockdown by stealth, he wrote. Many Americans, especially parents of school-aged children, would agree. But it's possible that many on Twitter didn't see his message. This week, Twitter released a set of internal emails and documents from before Elon Musk's takeover of the company in October. One of the revelations was that Dr. Bhattacharya, among many others, had been censored and shadow banned, tweets hidden in various ways, by Twitter. Now, of course, if you've read the Twitter files, you know that a lot of this was at the behest of the federal government, of the Biden administration, and the three-letter agencies taking multiple meetings with the heads of Twitter, with all the different departments, and advising them on what they wanted censored. That's your government censoring, but they get a corporation to do it for them. It's a neat trick. Screenshots from an internal Twitter content moderation system showed that his account was tagged with a label of Trends Blacklist, which ensured that his tweets would never make it to the algorithmic trending topics on Twitter's front page. How many people endured weeks-long quarantine because Dr. Bhattacharya's message was suppressed? How many students would have been spared the education death knell of remote learning had schools heeded his advice or even known about it? Unlike Dr. Bhattacharya, I am not a medical expert. Normally, I wouldn't insert myself into someone else's domain, but the nation's health authorities had no problem inserting themselves into mine. Well, that's a great line. They meddled in my business, my church, my kids' education, my health, my grocery store, my gym, my coffee shop, my barber, my pharmacy. You can add my pharmacy to that list. In each case, some government entity was there with strangling regulations or an order to shut down entirely. So I formed a ragtag group of activists, analysts, experts, and parents, all trying to get our lives back to normal. We called our group Rational Ground and worked to amplify common sense COVID policies. We published interactive charts, highlighted data refuting the stay-at-home orders, and pointed out the low risk of the virus for children. Again, if you're on the left, there were so many people outside of the corporate government echo chamber that you're in, the bubble, the propaganda bubble, so many people of all different stripes, left and right, who knew these things that you're just finding out, and who were being punished for saying anything about it, and who were trying to organize, and who were putting out studies, and the studies were getting taken down. And, you know, those of us in the chat, I'm sure you have stories just like mine. I was posting what I could in groups and stuff on Facebook, and I would get banned from the Facebook groups for sharing scientific studies. I would have strangers I don't even know attacking me and calling me all kinds of horrible names for sharing science. Hey, look at this study. You grandma killer. You maggot, right? Dumb people, by the way, who think they're smart. She says, it was a lonely and difficult fight, but Dr. Bhattacharya was a calm and steady ally. By the fall of 2020, we focused our efforts to support Scott Atlas, a Stanford colleague of Dr. Bhattacharya and a key advisor to the Trump administration on COVID. After President Trump lost the election, the momentum Dr. Atlas had won was seemingly lost. The Biden administration pushed for restrictions and for censorship of those who disagree with the government's official position. Those of you who keep asking me in my real life and stuff, and also online friends who are on the left, and you keep asking, I don't understand, why did Trump win? Why did liberals vote for Trump? And especially some of my friends abroad in Europe who are like, I don't understand. This is a big part of why. Because the Democratic Party is so corrupt. The Democratic Party is not liberal at all. I'm not saying the Republican Party's perfect. I'm not even a member of that party. But it's sure as hell not as corrupt as the Democratic Party. There's a party of censorship right now, and it's the Democrats. You want to know why Trump won? It's because of this bullshit. Sorry, I said I wouldn't curse again. That's only 2. I'm done. But this is why. They censored science while telling us they were the science. Liars. Psychopaths. I would have drugged myself to the polls to vote for Trump if I had to crawl there just to register my voice against this corrupt machine. Lying to us, censoring us, telling us we couldn't go to work, telling us we couldn't go to family members' funerals, putting masks on children. And it's not just that they did all this evil. It's that while they did it, they pretended to be the good guys. Right in our face like psychopaths. They lied to us. They said they're the science. They're the caring and compassionate ones. While they oppressed people. While they fired people for not getting the shot. While they put grandmas in jail for opening their coffee shops. While they censored people like Dr. Bhattacharya. And I hope he does become the director. If there's one nominee that Trump has named, I hope this is the one. If there's only one that makes it through, let it be this guy. They need to clean house at the National Institutes for Health. I mean, the whole government. But let's start there. It's supposed to be about our health, not about taking our tax dollars and sending it to EcoHealth Alliance, who can send it to the Wuhan lab in China to fund gain of function research on coronaviruses that Obama banned here, but we just send our money somewhere else to do it, and then gaslight us and lie to us about the origins of that virus so that we don't hold their feet to the fire, so that we don't hold them accountable, and instead we all fight about who's getting what treatment for the virus. You should be angry about this. If you're on the left and you're just learning some of this stuff, like, you should be angry. Especially if you believed all of it. If they conned you. If they got you to put a mask on your kid. How about that? You should be angry. If they censored doctors like Bhattacharya so that you didn't even know that there were scientists who disagreed. I'll continue with this article. So she says the Biden administration pushed for restrictions and for censorship of those who disagree with the government's official position. In July of 2021, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki announced, quote, "We've increased disinformation research. Disinformation research." This is so Orwellian. It's like the Ministry of Truth in 1984, right? Which puts out lies and propaganda. That's the government. That's the Democrats. That's the media. That's all of our institutions. We've increased disinformation research and tracking within the Surgeon General's office. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation, like the scientific study they took down that I had shared. Ms. Psaki also revealed that senior staff for President Biden were a part of the White House's efforts to suppress free speech. This week's revelations about Twitter add to the evidence that something bad was afoot. Dr. Bhattacharya expressed shock on learning that his account had been targeted for censorship. Quote, "The thought that will keep me up tonight, censorship of scientific discussion permitted policies like school closures, and a generation of children were hurt." That's true. Remembering the adage that sunlight is the best disinfectant, Elon Musk, whose takeover of Twitter led to this and a series of other revelations, replied to Dr. Bhattacharya, "The sun is coming." And I'm sorry, the author of this piece is a man, Mr. Hart. I kept saying she and her, but this is a This is by a gentleman named Mr. Hart. He is the founder of Rational Ground and the author of Gone Viral: How COVID Drove the World Insane. Sounds like a good read. I've got another one here to share with you. That was from the Wall Street Journal. This one's from the Free Press. This one was also archived by Congress as part of a hearing. Twitter's secret blacklists. Teams of employees were tasked with suppressing the visibility of accounts or subjects deemed undesirable or dangerous, all in secret without informing users. This is an article from December 15th of 2022. Oh, it's by some great folks, Bari Weiss, Abigail Schreier, Michael Schellenberger, and Nellie Bowles. Twitter, the social media platform founded in 2006 with more than 330 million users that has fueled political uprisings, launched presidential campaigns, and bequeathed to us the 280-character rant, has claimed to be a global, quote, public square. Its mission to, quote, give everyone the power to create and share ideas and information instantly without barriers, end quote. But barriers, many of them, were erected. After the 2016 election of Donald Trump, Twitter started to play a more active role in policing or, quote, moderating, in tech parlance, that public square. It operated a secret blacklist with teams of employees tasked with suppressing the visibility of accounts or subjects deemed undesirable or dangerous. All of this was happening at the same time that major institutions across America in the media, education, tech, and elsewhere were becoming less tolerant of views that a few years ago were considered well within the 40-yard lines of American politics, but are now deemed far outside the parameters of acceptable discourse. The people in charge of these institutions enforced the new parameters by expanding the definitions of words like violence, harm, and safety. We've talked about this before. This is what cults do. They control your language. They change definitions of long accepted terms, and then they introduce new terms, a whole new dictionary, a whole new lexicon, so that they can control the way that people think and what they're allowed to think and what they're allowed to say. They call things violent if they don't like them, if they disagree. They call things harmful if they disagree. But by calling it violent when it's not, then they can justify removing it and censoring it, right? Because it's violence now. It also goes the other way. They pretend that mutilating and sterilizing children and castrating them and cutting off their breasts, that's not child abuse. They call that gender affirming care. So they can do it until you explicitly ban it. But it is abuse. This is what's known as Orwellian language. If you haven't read the book 1984 recently, read it again. Everything is named the opposite of what it is. Things once considered part of everyday life in America, like disagreeing about whether a global pandemic started in a market or a lab in Wuhan, were increasingly off limits. Twitter's waning appetite for ideas or points of view outside the mainstream, in other words, was part of a broader trend sweeping the country. Whether the platform was a catalyst for that trend or a mirror of it is a question better left to historians. What is perfectly clear today is that the platform is an indispensable tool for journalists and politicians, and that it has deeply affected which stories get covered and how. It has the power to determine the heroes and villains of contemporary news cycles and to decide which areas of inquiry are legitimate and which are strictly off limits, even wrong. So the fact that Twitter shielded users from perspectives it deemed extremist, and that it did so while pretending that it wasn't doing so, is a fact relevant to all Americans, whether they have ever logged onto Twitter or not. Tweets or accounts or hashtags that offended the powers that be were not publicly shamed, but quietly throttled, meaning that users frequently did not know they were being deprived of arguments or data that did not support the prevailing wisdom or the politically favored narrative. For years, Twitter denied that it did this. Quote, "We do not shadow ban." So declared Vidya Gade, I can never remember how to say her name, who was then Twitter's head of legal policy and trust. Do you remember when she went on Timcast and she sat there and lied and just, oh, we don't shadow ban? Let me skip down a bit. Quote, and we certainly don't shadow ban based on political viewpoints or ideology, end quote. Can you believe she had the nerve to say that? To lie like that? Sociopathic, right? Here's the full quote. People are asking us if we shadow ban. We do not. But let's start with, what is shadow banning? The best definition we found is this: deliberately making someone's content undiscoverable to everyone except the person who posted it, unbeknownst to the original poster. We do not shadow ban. You are always able to see the tweets from accounts that you follow, although you may have to do more work to find them. Like go directly to their profile. There's the rub, right? Because they're shadow banned. And we certainly don't shadow ban based on political viewpoints or ideology. Their statement, setting the record straight on shadow banning, was Twitter's attempt to clear up what they had dismissed as a conspiracy theory. It's so funny how they call everything that's true that they don't like, that's an inconvenient truth, it's a conspiracy theory. The idea that the site discriminates against users and viewpoints it dislikes by limiting the reach and visibility of their posts, they called that a conspiracy theory. Not 6 months before that, Olinda Hassan, then Twitter's policy manager of trust and safety, was caught on film by Project Veritas saying, quote, we are trying to get the shitty people to not show up. It's a product thing that we're working on, end quote. Which is perhaps why they felt the need to quash that particular conspiracy theory and let users know you're imagining things. Stop being so paranoid. Let me scroll down just a bit. So how could executives claim that they were not shadow banning? There are two meanings of shadow banning. One is techie argot, and it refers to something specific, a practice in which a social media platform makes a particular user's post invisible to everyone else on the site but the user without informing the user of the action. In this very technical sense, Twitter apologists claim that the company did not shadow ban. But of course, this is not what the public meant when it accused social media companies of suppressing their views. What shadow banning has long meant to lay critics of Twitter was not that no one on the platform could see their posts, but that far fewer people could. They meant something fishy was happening, screens were being thrown up, the air let out of the tires, so that posts by conservatives or non-woke thinkers never seemed to reach as many eyeballs as those that espoused left-approved ideas. This is true. They weren't techies themselves and didn't know how to describe the mechanism of their suppression, but they sensed its presence. Not surprisingly, when we searched the Twitter files for evidence of shadow banning, nothing came up. That's mostly a matter of word choice. Twitter executives prefer to call it visibility filtering, or VF, which is all over the files. Multiple high-level sources at Twitter confirm the meaning of these terms. Quote, think about visibility filtering as being a way for us to suppress what people see to different levels. It's a very powerful tool, one senior Twitter employee told us. Actually, it's a set of tools that include locking users out of searches. This has happened. This is still happening at Twitter, even with Elon there. They still haven't worked out all the kinks. I saw recently James Lindsay they were doing this to him. There are sometimes where they would, if you search for a user, you could put their whole username into the search bar and it would not pull them up. It would pull up other people that you didn't search for. Quote, we control visibility quite a bit, and we control the amplification of your content quite a bit. And normal people do not know how much that we do. How much we do, one Twitter employee told us. Two additional Twitter employees confirmed this. Quote, they say they didn't put their thumb on the scale. Musk, who became CEO of Twitter in October, told the Free Press. Quote, but they were pressing the thumb hard in favor of the left. If I left, you could get away with death threats and nothing would happen. Oh, if you were on the left, that's true. If you're on the right, you could get suspended for retweeting a picture of a Trump rally. Or, in the case of Meghan Murphy, banned for saying men are not women. That happened. Nor was the anger directed at Twitter confined to the right. Quote, this is from a California Democrat whose district encompasses much of Silicon Valley. Ro Khanna, said, the problem that's happening here is that people are conflating hate speech with viewpoint discrimination. He added, the essence of this story is that Twitter is telling some people that based on the viewpoints that they have, they are not allowed to ask a question or share their point of view in the same way as everyone else in the room. And that's just anti-democratic. There's a good Democrat on the issue of free speech. There's one. There's one. Here's where we get to Dr. Bhattacharya. So who and what did Twitter mask from view? One user was Stanford's Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, an MD, an economist, and a professor of health policy at Stanford. In 2020, he and Dr. Martin Kulldorff, then a professor of medicine at Harvard, and Dr. Sunetra Gupta, a professor of epidemiology at Oxford, warned in an open letter of the dangerous impact of lockdowns, especially on children, the working class, and the poor. They argued for focused protection for the most medically vulnerable and a return to normal life for the rest of society. This made the three scientists targets of Washington's public health bureaucracy. Twitter put Bhattacharya's account on the Trends blacklist, which meant that no matter how many likes or views one of his tweets racked up, it could never trend. Its visibility to users on the platform would be sharply curtailed. And you can see this is from the Twitter files, from internal documents where they have him here. They show his profile. They have a little thing on the problematic people, and that you can see that they have enacted a Trends blacklist on him and a recent abuse strike. And then it goes on with other people who were on the blacklist. But I just wanted to show you that. I feel like I have to, there's a lot more of this evidence, and you should go, if you're on the left, I feel like I have to show you guys a lot because you don't read this stuff for some reason. They've done a good job of scaring you into like not even reading the Twitter files. Why wouldn't you go and read the Twitter files? Why wouldn't you? You're an adult. Go and see what's in there on your own. Let me see if I can play you. We watched the we watched part of the PBS thing. Let's see if the audio is working. I'm going to put this back on the screen. Tell me if you guys can hear this. This is where she's saying, you know, it's really important that you don't have somebody in that position as the director of the National Institutes for Health who's just pushing dogma, right? Like, wouldn't want to have another Francis Collins in there. Am I right?
Cures. You want anyone who's going to lead the agency to do so driven by evidence, not dogma. You want them to fulfill the obligations of the responsibility of the role and not necessarily out of, you know, some kind of perceived loyalty to the person who appointed them. That is true for everyone. And, you know, it is my hope that as a physician and as a researcher, that Dr. Bhattacharya will be driven by evidence. You know, he does have scientific training and he has done scientific research. And so it's my hope he will.
She's saying she hopes he'll be driven by evidence. And based on everything I know about him and what I know about you in this limited view, of course it is, I will admit it's a limited view, it's this interview, but I would say he's a lot more steered by evidence than you are. You already had to admit that you got many things wrong. And also you said you're not great at ethics because you didn't know. How could you have known what's the right or wrong thing to do when it comes to taking away people's individual liberties and rights, right? Or masking kids?
Use that scientific mind to look at the evidence and make decisions about the running of that organization and its outcomes as the evidence drives him, not due to, you know, personal grievances or any perceived, you know, dogma or biases.
When you look at him within the constellation of Trump's other selections, obviously we have RFK Jr. at the very top of that pyramid. He has been a wellspring of misinformation about vaccines.
Let me pause it there. As I was doing research for this episode and I kept pulling up clips, and I have some others queued up that we may or may not watch, they all do this thing where they accuse RFK of pushing, look at this, misinformation about vaccines. They outright say he pushes conspiracy theories and debunked theory and all this. and then they never follow up and give you any evidence or show you. Leftists. Is this how easy you are? Are you this cheap? I'm telling you to actually go and read for yourself. Look at the Twitter files, see what you find there, look at the evidence, look at the scientific studies that many of us have shared, many of those studies that got banned by Facebook and Twitter. These guys just say stuff. Yeah, low resolution thinking. It's like they just tell you what to think. Yeah, Jacob, even now, they continue to smear those who were always right. Yeah, they do. Have you read, if you're on the left, let me ask you a question. Because I have a friend who did not vote for Trump. I love this lady. Did not vote for Trump, but she's not a crazy leftist who's, gonna unfriend me because she knows that I did. She's not like some of you guys. But when I've talked to her about things, whenever we were talking about Trump's appointments or his nominees, and I told her I was excited about RFK, and she has just said some stuff about him that it's like, where are you getting this? Because and to me, when I hear her say stuff about him, I know that that's how effective the corporate propaganda has been. And so I know that some of you on the left, because I'm friends with her, and she said some of this stuff to me about how RFK is crazy. He's just crazy. And I know that's what you guys are being told. Where's your evidence? Let's listen and see if PBS gives you any evidence. They just said he's a wellspring of misinformation about vaccines.
Dr. David Weldon, the former congressman to run the CDC, he has also falsely linked vaccines and autism. Dr. Marty McCary to run the FDA, along with several others. When you look at this suite of individuals who will be running the nation's health policy, what is your overall sense of how this is going to go?
So my biggest worry is really about the nomination for the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, and that is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Compared to the other nominees, he is really in a class all by himself. Whereas I have some disagreements with some of the other nominees, these are people who have training in the areas that they are going to be potentially overseeing. They are people who, have engaged in some level of considering evidence. RFK Jr. stands out quite as a fringe character. He has really made a whole career of not only, not paying attention to evidence, but just
really
pushing consistently debunked talking points.
Really?
Just to fulfill an agenda that is really quite outside of the norm. It is really quite fringe. It is really quite considered wacky in many instances. I mean, some of his views are just simply very strange. So I am quite worried because the head of HHS is the boss of all of these individuals. And so
wait a minute. Wacky, strange, fringe. How many of these words can she put in one smear? How many? Just remember, this guy, director of the National Institute for Health under Biden, who pushed the COVID propaganda and a bunch of things that we know are now lies, or I knew then they were lies, but now everybody seems to know. This guy, not weird, not strange, not wacky. He's not wacky.
Thank God these shots came very fast, so all my fears are now behind me.
Not wacky. not wacky. Let's go back to let's go back to RFK being a whack job. Actually, I think I have to. Pirate Tomsky, hello. Welcome to the chat. Pirate Tomsky says, bro can't even get a decent mic. Oh my goodness. RFK is just weird. Yeah, he's projection, Jennifer. Yes. PBS, you suck. They do. Yeah. John's taking it as a bit of good news that they're doing all these attacks. He says, good, they're scared. I hope they are. And let me say, this is what I was going to ask you before, leftists. If you don't know anything about RFK except what the propaganda, the corporate media, and the government has told you you should think about him, there's two things I would suggest just to start to demonstrate to yourself that you actually are an open-minded individual and that you actually do and go and search for the truth and you actually do try and look at evidence to form your opinion instead of just being told what opinion you're supposed to have. I would say watch the speech he gave. We've watched it on this channel, but the speech that he gave when he announced that he was pulling out of the race for president and was throwing his support behind Trump. It's an excellent speech. If we didn't live in such a crazy cluster B paradise, I think it would go down in history. It was a great speech, and it was all about making America healthy again. And the other thing I would say is that you should read his book, The Real Anthony Fauci. You know, this woman wants to pretend like he hasn't done any research or he doesn't know what he's talking about. They never, ever want to engage on the subject of that book, do they? They never want to talk about it. Go and read The Real Anthony Fauci. Look at all the studies that he sources in the book. Look at what's laid out as fact versus opinion. And then come back to this channel. However long it takes you to read that book, come back to this channel and tell us what you thought about it. I'm very curious to know. I'm not being sarcastic. I want you to read the book. And then come back and tell me if you still think he's a weird, crazy, weirdo guy. Therese. Hey, Therese. She says, I'm not for RFK on most things, but he's got the food and healthy thing, right? Yeah, he does. The health thing, he does. And I know you wouldn't probably line up with him on other things. Because it's so funny. They're trying to paint him now and Tulsi Gabbard and all these other people who are liberals as, they're crazy right wingers. Now it's like, he's not even a conservative. He's a liberal. But, if you throw in for Trump, you're supposedly a right winger. Okay, let me put this back up. Tell me if you can hear this. We're going to finish with her smear of RFK. Let me back up just a little. She's quite worried because he's just so strange, she says, and weird.
Very strange
and wacky.
So I am quite worried because the head of HHS is the boss of all of these individuals. And so, even if you have good people with, good training and credible scientific minds at the helm, the question is always, what are they going to be able to do, given the fact that the person who may potentially run the Department of Health and Human Services really is one who is prone to favor conspiracy theories over actual evidence.
Wow, just the projections off the charts. Conspiracy theories. Who favored conspiracy theories? Was it not the corporate media and the government? Conspiracy theories over actual evidence? Do you mean like the conspiracy theory that COVID originated by jumping several species in a wet market and there was like a bat and maybe a monkey and like some guy was eating dinner and like how crazy was that story? Versus there's a lab there in that town that studies coronaviruses and how to do gain of function research on them to make them more contagious and more deadly. And oh, by the way, we're funding that research. The NIH is funneling our tax dollars to EcoHealth Alliance and funneling it to the Wuhan lab. But they want to say conspiracy theories. They want to say, we don't want conspiracy theory, just the ones we push, just the crazy ones. Unbelievable. I love it. Did you guys love it when leftists, Jon Stewart finally, I forget what late night show he was on, but he finally, just like they're all now coming around and going, oh, hindsight's 2020. He went on some late night show and he made fun of the COVID origin story that they wanted us to buy, the ridiculous one. That meant a lot to hear it come from a leftist finally, after they did a good job smearing all these scientists and doctors who were asking questions back then. Adam Worrell says, I rock. I'm Facebook friends with the next National Institutes of Health director. LOL. Yeah, he's great on social media. Go follow him on X or Facebook. I didn't even know he was on Facebook. I wanted to say thanks to Pirate Tomsky for the super chat for £5. He says, Keri, I don't know what you're talking about. I like it when people hide facts from me to help me push ideology. Trust the science, you bigot. Thanks, Pirate. Get me back on the science track. What else can I show you about Dr. Bhattacharya? Well, here's a couple things. Like I said, he was at the forefront of many fights during the COVID years. He really put his neck on the line. He was very brave, and he was putting his neck on the line for truth and for actually for saving lives. And so one of the things he did is he testified against the airline industries, and he testified and said, no, actually, there's no evidence that shows that wearing masks on an airplane is going to do anything. This makes me so happy because I thought that was one of the dumbest. There were several parts during the Trump years, the COVID years, where you were surrounded by the stupidity, and it really did feel like we were all living in 1984 or Brave New World or something, where you were just supposed to comply with the lies. And it seemed like the compliance was more important than anything else. It was more important than anything else. That's why I rejected the mask to such a degree. There's all these people who, one of the gross things was influencers who claimed to be against all of the COVID propaganda, who were selling masks in their store. And it was like, you know what? No, I'll never sell a mask with my logo. Are you effing kidding me? I don't agree with this thing, but I'm going to profit off of it. It's disgusting. I'm going to sell. If you're going to wear one, wear mine. So gross. No. And I didn't comply. Even on planes. There was only one trip that I ever took where I had a problem where they reported me. And so they called me to the desk in between flights and asked me if they were going to have a problem with me on the next flight. But other than that, and the only reason that happened was because I was in first class. Timcast had flown me out there for a show, and they had paid for this nice first class ticket. And so I think that was the difference, was because I was in that class, and they pay more attention to you up there, so they noticed. Whereas usually I fly coach, and I would just get away with, seriously, I would take it down the whole time. I would wear the bandana one, and sometimes when I boarded, they would make me put on the dumb mask, that they would give you. And either way, sometimes they didn't. They just let me keep the bandana. I would just test to see if they would let me get away with. And then I would just take it down the whole time. And if I saw a flight attendant coming, I would put a snack in my mouth like I was eating as they walk by, or put it up for a second and take it right back down. I did not fly with that thing. There was no reason to. Even if you believe that the mask worked, which they didn't. But even if you believe that they did, are you telling me that in this confined space where everybody's taking it down to eat and drink, that somehow it's like magically, but I'm going to put it right back up when you're done? No, that's so dumb. To ask me to comply with something that's like to say that the emperor has clothes when he doesn't. It felt like you wanted to step on my soul. And no, I wasn't going to let you do that willingly. I was going to fight it. That whole time period was just insane. But yeah, the airplanes, that was one of the craziest ones. One of the other crazy ones was the restaurants. How they would pretend like magically when you got to the restaurant, you had to wear this stupid mask to walk to your table, past and between tables of people not wearing the mask because they're seated and they're eating. So, and then when you get to your table, you can take the mask off and but you put it back on when you walk out. So stupid. So stupid. So I used to since we were living in a surreal time, I tried to have fun with it. I like to do sort of personal trolls, just a joke for one, or for me and my husband, or for the people. I wanted people around me to think about how stupid this was. All the people complying. Not in an over the top way, not in a yelly, angry way, but in a funny way. I would not comply, or I would make a joke out of it. So there was one time Anthony took me to a really nice sushi restaurant. It was a date night. And we get there and they were like, ma'am, do you have a mask? You have to wear a mask as you walk to the table. So I had this black bag. And so I took the bag out and just put the whole skin tight bag over my head, my whole head. So I couldn't see anything. I looked like a hostage video. And Anthony had to walk me to the table because I couldn't see. I was bagged. And I was walking between all these tables of people not wearing masks, of course, because they're seated and eating at this fancy restaurant. And then we get to the table. And the waiter was like, "Are you sure you wouldn't want one of these masks?" I was like, no, I feel safest in this. And then we got to the table and I was like, "Are we safe now? Are we at the table?" My poor husband, he had to put up with me like, yeah, it was like a burqa. It was more than a burqa though, because there was no eye holes. Well, once we got to the table, I made a big production of like, okay, I can take it off now. But the whole point was like, so what if I make these people uncomfortable, or if they laugh, great. That's what I'm going for, laughter. I'm also going for you realizing how stupid this is, that we're all going along with this. So stupid. Yes, Davina, the arrows on the floor were also hilarious. There were so many stupid things that they wanted us to participate in. Jacob, if you like that story, I have many more like that. That was just the fancy restaurant one, but there were lots. I had fun. I had tried to have fun during the dystopia. So anyway, the flights. Here's what I noticed during those years. I did fly a lot compared to the average person during those years, and like I said, I did not wear it, and I didn't even wear it I didn't wear it in the airport either. I would wear it right when I was in the security line. I would have the bandana on under my nose. When I got right up there where they're checking you and checking your ID, I'd put it back over my nose like I'm the person complying. I'd get through the security and I would take the mask off all the way down around my neck, walk through the whole airport daring anybody to say something to me. I wanted people to see, hey, there's an adult who's not going along with this shit. Because I wanted more people to stop going along with it. And every once in a while, I would see, and it was very rare, but I would see another unmasked person in the airport. And it would just be like this moment of like, I get you. I get you. You, one person, right? There was a guy on a train like that once. We were both like, I get you, fist bump. There was the woman in the grocery store who took her mask off because I wasn't wearing one, who asked me about it. And I was like, oh yeah, they don't enforce it here. Take it off. They just suggested at the door, take it off. She did. It's funny because now when I go to the airport, I look around it and sometimes I remember those years and I have to stop myself from feeling resentment because I look around at everyone and I'm like, you're all a bunch of conformist pigs. And I know this. I know this now about you. And back then it was easy for me to tell. But whatever. There's so much that we have not like processed yet about those years and about what they put us through and about our fellow man and about conformity and just compliance and all of it. But here, this is what Dr. Bhattacharya was doing. He was actually testifying.
COVID. Those comments, of course, were not received well by some, including Dr. Fauci, President Biden's chief medical advisor, who was asked yesterday on ABC's This Week about when masks might no longer be required on airplanes.
They were suggesting that there really isn't much of a need for a mask on an airplane. Are we going to get to the point where we won't have to wear masks on airplanes?
I don't think so. I think when you're dealing with a closed space, even though the filtration is good, that you want to go that extra step.
Remember what we know and what we knew about Fauci at the time is that he lied about the mask. He told all of the American public, he went on interviews and said the mask won't do anything, don't wear them. He said this. Then he changed tune all of a sudden and said, no, everybody should wear the mask. You all have to comply. Everybody needs to wear the mask. And when he was asked why he lied, he said he lied and he came up with some excuse. I lied because I thought we might run out of masks. That's what he said. That's what he said. So he told us he lied, but he had a good reason for lying. But it was still a lie because when his internal emails were leaked, we found out that a close friend of his had written him after that date and asked him one-on-one, do the masks really work? Should I wear a mask? And he told her, no, don't wear one.
While masks might be an extra step, are they a necessary step or one that needs to be mandated? Are they even a significant step? Joining me now to talk about this and more is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, professor of medicine at Stanford University and one of the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, a statement advocating an alternative approach to the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Bhattacharya, welcome back to the program.
Great pleasure to be here.
Well, I've got a lot I want to talk to you about, but we're going to start with the comments there from Dr. Fauci, the prospect that masks are an extra step that may always be helpful.
I mean, if you look at the evidence about ventilation, especially in places that are excellently ventilated like airplanes, that is a far more important intervention than the mask that you wear. The typical masks people wear have no evidence at all that they stop the spread of the disease or protect the person wearing it from disease, especially like the cloth masks. And so I think this idea that it's necessary as an extra step, I think it doesn't make sense. It doesn't correspond with the scientific evidence actually saying, especially the randomized literature about masks. In this case, the CEOs are right and Dr. Fauci is wrong.
Do you?
I just wanted to show you this because he was a badass during all of the COVID years. And I wanted you to get a sense of him on camera because he also comes off as very sincere. I don't get any bad character vibes from him like I do from some people who I may agree with on what they're saying, but there's something about my gut that pings the wrong way. And that doesn't happen with him. That's why I said I think he's the best of he checks every possible box. You know, he's got this background in medicine and science and the economy. So that is going to help him advise on policy matters. But then he's also seems like genuinely, my gut says this is a good guy. One other thing I wanted to show you that he did, and let me pull up this article. This is from the Miami Herald. So he didn't just testify about masks on planes and how there's no evidence that they actually did anything, but he also talked about in Florida. Here we go. He testified against forcing children to wear masks in schools. And he did all this while they were smearing him the whole time. So this is from the Miami Herald, the state's expert. Bhattacharya took the stand for the second time during the trial on Wednesday. He continued to espouse the arguments that DeSantis has used. Look how they're already biasing you against him. Because they've pre-biased you against DeSantis, so now they can bias you against Dr. Bhattacharya. They're all just terrible people. He continued to espouse the arguments that DeSantis has used regarding the virus, often ignoring questions from the plaintiff's lawyer in favor of questions he said were more relevant. He said there's no evidence to show that school districts with mask mandates fared better than districts without one. Hey, that's true, Miami Herald. Quote, the Delta variant, as I said, from the data on the UK is less deadly, but perhaps more transmissible. There's no evidence, there's no randomized evidence, no high quality evidence that masks will stop the disease spread, Bhattacharya testified on Tuesday. At the same time, he testified that requiring children to wear masks, quote, harms children's social and emotional development. It does. And we've seen that bear out. We've seen the CDC go ahead and change the developmental milestones for kids as a result of COVID policy, although they won't say that's what caused it. We've seen anxiety and depression rates skyrocket among teens, among kids. He was right. When asked if he thinks that masking children is, quote, child abuse, Bhattacharya said it depends on the children. He's very even-keeled, you know. I would have just said, yeah, I think it is. They try to paint him as crazy. He doesn't go nearly as far as some of us in terms of describing this, what we think was being done to kids. Then they have to engage in the smear attack that was happening on him. Look, Bhattacharya, who's advised the governor since last September, had been criticized across the nation for his views on handling the pandemic. The plaintiff's lawyers and experts also sought to raise doubts about his credibility. Quote, he's a medical economist. Look how the smears don't change. They call him just an economist. I just wanted to show you that too. He's been there since the beginning of the craziness around COVID, speaking the truth on behalf of science, on behalf of transparency and the health of the American people and the economy, on behalf of children. I'm very happy with this appointment. And I hope he gets confirmed. I hope if there's only one nomination that makes it through, this one's at the top of my list. So if there's anything else, I know we went over a lot and I had a lot more sources pulled up, but I think I'll just be belaboring some of the points I've already covered if I go into all of those documents. Let me just check my list and make sure I did get everything. Yes, he testified against masks on planes. Oh, here's one last one. Let's look at this. He called Fauci. He said that Fauci is not the high pope of science. This is great. I'm going to share this one and we can go out on this one. And also let me thank Pirate Tomsky for £5. He says, you want a flashback about how crazy things got? We have to watch Jesus, What Happened to Us by 5 Times August. Oh yeah. That's a great music video. I'm going to go out on this video instead. I do love that video and I've played it before, but I want to close on this guy just delivering the fist of truth, the hammer of truth. Hey, Boosh McFadden. Good to see you. So this is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya criticizing, rightly so, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the high pope of science.
The idea that you have a high pope of science, Tony Fauci, a man who can stand up in front of the American people and say, if you question me, you're not simply questioning a man, you're questioning science itself. We don't have a high pope of science. Science is a process of questioning. Science is a process of discovery by people in reasoned discussion with each other, developing data, testing hypotheses. It's a process that leads over time to better and better knowledge about the way the material world works. To displace that and to say, okay, a small number of people at the head of powerful cartels can then say, this is what the science says, and everyone must agree or else you are responsible for disinformation. It's extremely dangerous, Sean, and it's analogous almost to of a new dark age coming.
Yes,
a dark age where the processes that led to the huge advances in knowledge and material well-being and lifespans from the Enlightenment, it's drawing to a close. That we have instead a clerisy, a scientific clerisy that says, I know what's true, and I will make or break anyone who disagrees with me.
And the potential to make a break is so large there because of the concentration of power and money that we have today, right? The modern age features such concentrations that, it's very dangerous.
The Dark Ages. A clerisy, like a clergy is what that makes me think of people who call themselves the science. Down is up is down. The censors, the closed-minded people, those who are not interested in truth, they're just interested in power and telling you what to think. They pretend to be on the side of power, of truth and science. They're the ones that have to put signs in their yard telling you we believe in science, because otherwise you wouldn't know from their behavior that they believe in science, would you? That's what he's warning about. I think Dr. Jay Bhattacharya is a brilliant badass, and I fully support his nomination. I'm very excited about it. If you like this video and you want to share it with someone, especially if you have a friend maybe on the left who doesn't know anything about Dr. Bhattacharya and is just talking smack, please share this video with them. And if you think they're the type who's open to receiving information. And thank you guys for hanging out with me. I know this was a late one today, but I wanted to do one on the other side of this Thanksgiving holiday because I just got so excited about this nomination, and I appreciate you guys being here with me. Pirate Tomsky says, smash the likey thumbs uppy button thing. Thank you. Yes, smash the thumbs up if you liked it. And Therese, have a great weekend, Keri, and chat. Eat all the leftovers. Oh boy. it's gonna be a fun weekend. I hope you guys are. I hope you're still getting to spend time with family. Actually, I hope some of you got to have long weekends. That's fun. And I'll see you guys on Monday. Take care. Bye. Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, I'm gonna go then. And I don't need any of this. I don't need this stuff. And I don't need you. I don't need anything except this.